Just to get started, welcome everybody. My name is Greg Shapiro. I'm the admissions advisor here at Divine Mercy University, enrolling for the Spiritual Direction Certificate Program, which of course is what we will be discussing today. We'll be looking at the SDC program, help others flourish in the relationship with the Lord, really, which is what the purpose of spiritual direction is in the first place. With me today is Maria Brackett. Maria is the program director for the SDC program. So I'm glad that she's here, and I will turn the mic over to her just to introduce herself.
Thank you so much, Greg. I'm glad to be here. I want to wish everyone a happy Advent season as we journey towards Christmas. I am the program director. I've been in this role now for almost 3 years here at the university. I was also part of the team that helped to develop the certificate program when the university embarked in that direction. And I'm also a spiritual director myself and lead people through the spiritual exercises. So I just love this ministry and being a part of it, having that privilege to be a part of this ministry and just have people allowing me to accompany them in this sacred relationship with the Lord that they have. Thanks, Greg.
Great, thank you. All right, so why don't we get started? I want to make sure I'm being sensitive to everyone's time, but we can usually go through everything within an hour. But again, I'm just going to highlight, actually before we get started, again, there is, for those of you that are now just jumping in, we have a chat section and a Q&A section. At any point, feel free to drop those questions in. We might be able to address them immediately, or they might end up a little bit later toward the official Q&A section or period, but we'll make sure to have those questions answered for you. So with that said, why don't we get started? And here's what we're going to be looking at today. We're going to be talking about who we are as a university, why we exist, what our whole mission is. And then from there, we'll talk about what is spiritual direction. We'll look at about the SDC program, so what the program really entails. And then we'll go into the time frame, the cost and tuition, and how to apply. And by the way, right now we are enrolling for the spring term. This is just around the corner, but we still have time to get students enrolled. So I will highlight that if you are someone that really wants to get started as soon as you can, we still have time for you to get started on January 11th. So why don't we look at the mission of the university and really who we are. So the mission, I'll read this out. And Divine Mercy University's vision is to be an international center for scholarship and professional education dedicated to the study of the mind and soul, grounded in integral Catholic Christian view of the human person. Maintaining the highest academic standards, the institution will educate new generations of professionals in psychology-related fields and open new areas of scholarship for theories and explore the relationship of the human psyche and Catholic Christian theological, philosophical, and anthropological principles. So in short, we really take an integrative approach to psychology. We are primarily a university that teaches students on becoming clinical psychologists, becoming licensed professional counselors. We have our master's in psych program as well. But of course, today we're looking at spiritual direction, and that integrative component permeates into all of these programs, including SDC. That's actually something that makes this program very unique. That we're teaching students to become spiritual directors, but also giving them a fundamental understanding on the human mind and how that's going to relate within the capacity of spiritual direction. So I'll continue. The university provides students an appropriate academic and educational environment that supports the integration of science, scholarship, and a Catholic Christian understanding of the human person through a rigorous, critical, and objective search for truth. it assists students intellectually, humanly, and professionally as they prepare themselves to respond to their vocation as mental health professionals or as men and women in helping professions. And of course, this includes spiritual direction. The university's mission also involves dialogue about its integrative approach with practitioners, scholars, and cultural leaders nationally and internationally. We have students all over the world. So that really is our bread and butter. Again, integrating psychology with the Catholic teaching on human dignity. And again, this is a big part of this program as well. We're training students to be effective spiritual directors, training them to have that empathic and deep listening that's involved within being a spiritual director, but also giving them a sense of how the human mind works, maybe even the ability to recognize certain, whether it's mental health difficulties or trauma that they've gone through, or at the very least, the ability to speak to that when it comes up, and if necessary, effectively refer them to a licensed professional if that's ever needed. Yeah, I'd love to turn this over to Maria.
Yeah, I would love to say something just about the university and kind of the positioning of the spiritual direction certificate. We always say that sometimes that Divine Mercy University is kind of the best kept secret because it's just a powerhouse as far as a group of Catholic and Christian psychologists coming together and wanting to articulate a complete and full understanding, a Catholic Christian understanding of the human person, and then applying that to the world of psychology. But with a real desire, the university has a real desire to apply this understanding of the human person, which really is just embedded within the Catholic Christian tradition. So all they've done is kind of work that out and put it together and talked about just different ways of applying it so that every human person can really reach that flourishing here in this life and eternal life, kind of that abundant life that Jesus spoke about. And the spiritual direction certificate is really the university trying to enter into the world of certificates and see how we can serve those in ministry, that are trying to help, still taking this same understanding, the Catholic Christian understanding of the human person, but applying it to a different field now, applying it to spiritual life and the world of ministry. So it's not a master's in psychology and it's not psychologizing or making psychological the spiritual life either. It's really putting this understanding of the person, of the human person, at the service of the spiritual growth of the person. And so that's really what the certificate sets out to do within the context of the university and the mission of the university.
Yeah, great. And that's actually a common question that I get from folks when they ask, really what makes this program so unique from other programs, because we're not the only spiritual direction in existence. There are others, but that psychological component, and again, as Maria mentioned, the purpose isn't we're not training individuals to become psychologists, but still having that fundamental understanding and that ability to speak to someone in a way where you're acknowledging that maybe their mental health is sort of a topic of is a subject of discussion or whatever it may be. We are training our students to speak to that professionally, but very empathically, that you would want to hear, the way that you would want to see come from a spiritual director.
Yeah, and within the realm of spiritual direction, not trying to be, therapists or anything like that, because that's not what we're trained or licensed to be able to do, but sticking within the world of spiritual direction and the spiritual growth of the person. But being able, I think what our program does offer, Greg, is an understanding of the human person. And so our students really talk about how it helps them to understand the people that they direct, but also how it helps them to understand themselves. And really, spending time to just to understand these different layers or dimensions or aspects of the human person that have to be taken in consideration when you have someone in front of you and you're trying to help them in their walk with the Lord.
Yeah, very well put. Why don't we move down?
So I think we'll get into some specifics of that later on, Greg. And I think when we talk about the different courses and things like that, they'll be able to see just how we kind of weave everything together.
Yes, absolutely. So next, just to share with you our accreditation, we are institutionally accredited through the Southern Association of Colleges and Schools Commission on Colleges, for short, that's SACS. And this is one of the 7 major accrediting bodies. So we do stand by a high standard of education. We're also approved to operate by SCHEV, that's the State Council of Higher Education in Virginia. And that top accreditation that you're seeing, the American Psychological Association, I included here, and I'll explain why. This is actually a programmatic accreditation that you would only find within a doctoral program. And we do have a PsyD program, and that one is APA accredited. But the reason why I do include it here, even though this obviously is not a doctoral program, is because we still use that same APA writing style in the program, in SDC. So students do use that APA writing format. Some of you might already have experience with it. If so, that's great. If you have no experience and you would once in the program only now be doing this for the first time, that's absolutely fine. We have a lot of students that are doing APA writing for the first time ever, and it's covered in the orientation. And it'll eventually become second nature. You'll get the hang of it. I've never heard any, just speaking with students that have gone through this, when I've asked them what their experience has been, some of them shared that they got the hang of it pretty quickly. Some said that there may have been a slight learning curve. Maybe it took them a little bit more time to adapt to it, but eventually it's something that we make sure that students really get a grasp of. So what is spiritual direction? Many of you, I'm sure, have a great idea of what this is, but for many people, they hear the term spiritual direction, and this can conjure up many different ideas. For some people, they might think that being a catechist is spiritual direction, or when going to confession and speaking with your confessor, that would count. We wouldn't see it that same way. Spiritual direction really is a very specific form of ministry. And the way that we like to categorize it, it's first and foremost, it's accompaniment. It's a director working with a directee, assisting people on their path to the Lord. It's the act of being there for them in service both to them and to the Lord. Because of course, as we're guiding individuals and really helping them grow closer to God, this is a real service to God himself as well. And it's deep listening. It's deep listening to the directee to help them deepen in their experience of the Lord and his narrative in their lives. So whether it's really trying to get a better grasp of their faith and maybe their vocation, or maybe trying to understand where their vocation should be, a director is there to really help with wrapping their heads around their faith and understanding what God is calling them toward. Spiritual direction is also a pilgrimage toward God. It's a clear goal of growing closer to him. And as we mentioned earlier, it's not therapy, so it's not the same. I think for many people, they might see some overlapping comparisons. It's many times one-on-one. So I understand where that comparison does come from, but it wouldn't be the same. Rather, the point of spiritual direction is to help that individual in walking closer to God. One of our faculty members, he shared, he said, as a spiritual director, I'm not the shepherd, I'm the sheepdog, and I'm here just to help guide the sheep closer to the shepherd. And I thought that was a really good sort of simple way of putting it. And also I'll mention one of our students shared an analogy as well. And he said, spiritual direction is two people walking through a dark room, and the director's the one with the lantern, and he's the one shining in different parts of that dark room. And he's not telling the other person what to do, but really just making observations and sharing that information. But it's the other person's job to apply that information that's being shown to him by the director and helping him find his way into the light. And I thought that was a really good, simple way of putting it. And that's really what spiritual direction is and how we are recognizing it from that Catholic tradition.
Greg, I'd like to add just a few little things. So as Greg was saying, there can be, someone can receive direction in confession or from a priest or for something. But when we're talking about spiritual direction as a ministry, as a thing, as a specific ministry, like Greg was saying, this is what we're talking about here, right? And being trained for that ministry. And the understanding that the church has that not only ministers of the church, not only permanent deacons and priests, or not even only just religious or ministers, if you're coming from a Christian tradition, can give spiritual direction, but also lay people. And this has always been in the church, but I think there's just different times or different cultures that have shown it in different ways. I always like to point to the fact that John Paul II's first spiritual director was a layman that brought him into and taught him how to brought him into the world of contemplative prayer. So just beautiful. So this is, and there are many examples, but this is kind of, this program therefore is open to all these different people, those that are feeling called to really explore this ministry, understand it, see if maybe confirm a call to this ministry as they're gaining information and knowledge about it.
Yeah, that's great. In fact, when we look at the residencies section of this presentation, we'll talk more about really the diversity within the cohorts, as far as some come from a religious order, some of them are consecrated religious, some are consecrated lay people, some are, it really does vary, but we'll talk more about that and how that actually brings a richness into this program as well. Very good. So now looking at what to expect in the spiritual direction certificate program. So now just going more into the nitty-gritty. There are 6 courses in this program, and all 6 courses are done online. And they're also done asynchronously. So, for instance, for many people, they think of online being where a group of students are logging in at a specific time over Zoom and learning the content. And that would be more of a synchronous format. This is asynchronous. So the majority of what you'll be experiencing is logging into discussion boards. So this means that you can log in at any time that works within your schedule, giving you a little bit more flexibility. You'll have modules that will be available to you, and you'll have in the discussion boards topics that are being posted, and students are responding to that. This is basically the classroom where students are there engaging and discussing the content. So with that, while all the courses are done online, there are a couple of face-to-face components as well. And we'll go a little bit more into detail with these, but the first face-to-face component would be the 2 4-day residencies, which happen on campus. So again, they happen twice. They happen each for 4 days. They carry over to the weekend. We'll look a little bit more into that in the next couple of slides. The other face-to-face component would be the 60 practicum hours. And Maria, I'm going to bounce this over to you in just a moment. But the 60 practicum hours, this is where you'll be active as a spiritual director in your local area. So at a little bit closer toward the end of the program, students are actually beginning their activity as spiritual directors before they even graduate. So with that, Maria, I'd love for you to share a little bit more about that practicum, as far as what students are doing when they're fulfilling these hours, because you're faculty, and I know that's a big part of what so much of the content leads up to.
Thanks so much, Greg. So in the fifth and the sixth course of the certificate, so the penultimate and the last course of the certificate, students begin their practicum hours. So this is where you start seeing people in spiritual direction, and you tell them that you're a spiritual director in training, and you receive supervision during that time to help you to just to understand and unpack some of those situations or experiences that you might be having, always, of course, in an anonymous fashion, not identifying the names of the person that you're directing, just because of the confidentiality of spiritual direction. So that's a 60-hour requirement, and that requirement is 48 hours of seeing people in spiritual direction and 12 hours of supervision. And the supervision is given in the courses themselves. So you don't have to look for a supervisor. It's integrated within your study program. But that's what that means, Greg. And it just really starts the person out in starting to see people in spiritual direction and receiving feedback and being supported during that time. It's becoming a common element now in spiritual direction training programs to have this. I would say that most of the programs, their practicum hours are not as beefy as ours. They tend to be, a less of a requirement, maybe 30 hours, maybe 20 hours, but we've just seen that this, you need to be doing it. It's like riding a bike. You need to be doing it in order to understand just some of the ins and outs of it. And you need to be supported and have supervision at that time. You always need to have supervision as a spiritual director, but this type of coaching that is done every other week in those courses really is a big help as you're doing those practicum hours. I hope those answered the questions that you were thinking of, Greg.
Yeah, and it does. And one question that I think is also worth asking you, Maria, what if a student is not completing the 60 hours by the point of the end of their second course? Can they get an extension on this? How does that work?
Thanks for that question, Greg. So students actually have 6 months after that last course to finish their practicum hours. So all in all, we're talking about pretty much almost close to a year from the time that they start doing practicum. So it's not a rushed tons of hours of seeing directees in a short period of time. It's really very doable. And of course, if there's anything that happens and, some life situation that comes up, you can always reach out to me and we can talk about it and see if an extension needs to be given. But usually our students don't need that. It's a minority that asks for an extension, just because it's a good amount of time. You could even finish, which some students do, finish their last course and finish their practicum hours all at that same time, and they don't need the 6 months to finish after that. But
Great.
You have 6 months.
Yeah, very good. We have a question, and I think these are this is sort of a two-part question, Maria. These are great questions to ask you, actually, and I think it'd be also great for just serving as an educational point for our guests here. But Wesley asked two questions, and one is, so he wrote, mental health issues will no doubt arise for many in spiritual direction. So part one of the question is there any research supporting spiritual direction as having a positive impact on such issues? So I'll pause that before I get to the second question.
Wesley, well, thanks so much for your question. In fact, the university is involved with a project that comes out of McLean Hospital, associated to Harvard University, in doing research about the relationship between faith and mental health. And there is so much research done about this and just the benefit of a person's faith life and mental health healing and and mental health in general, just how much it helps. So there is a lot of research, and it's something that's been growing over time. So I would think, based on that, if someone did have a spiritual director and had an active faith life, that would definitely help any type of mental health issues that they were having. There can be times, I must say, though, when a person is going through so much mental health difficulty that they really don't have the energy or the bandwidth to be dedicated in a spiritual direction relationship. So sometimes they can still have a spiritual director, but the spiritual direction maybe is not as frequent, or maybe they just need to focus on their mental health. Almost, just like if someone had an illness, a physical illness, there are definitely times when people have physical illnesses, and even though they would love to have a spiritual director or have spiritual direction, they just don't have the bandwidth at that time. And it's more of sitting with them, comforting them, reassuring them of the presence of the Lord. But maybe it's not the spiritual direction as a, it's a spiritual direction that's adapted to where they are and their needs in their life, which is happens at all different moments. But it does look different when someone's going through a crisis, whether a mental health crisis or if they're in their own physical health.
Yeah, and I think, in fact, that sort of content is covered in the last course, where it talks about really how to effectively assist someone that might need that referral to a licensed professional, and when to do that appropriately. So that's a great question, Wesley. And here's a second part to his question, Maria. So he also wrote, if spiritual direction is a valid and even transformative ministry of the church, why is referral to psychology needed at all?
Well, if you're familiar with St. Thomas Aquinas, one of the great things that he articulated was grace builds on nature, right? So the field of the psychologist, even though you can't really separate the human person in their different dimensions, the field of psychologists is primarily that human nature, whereas spiritual direction is really focused on God and the relationship with God, the grace, the work of grace. So it's really beautiful to be able to have both of them. It's not that every person needs to have a psychologist and be in counseling, right? I'm not saying that, but each one has its field in their place, and their specialization is different, right? Of course, God can do anything, and he can produce miracles and heal us in so many different ways as he decides. But he usually tries to stick to the normal ways of, and so this is, counselors and therapists are really dedicated to that human nature, whereas the spiritual director is dedicated to the life of grace and the growth of grace in the human person and helping them to do that.
Yeah, very good. Wesley, these are great questions. I'm glad you asked these. Very good. So again, if any other questions come up, feel free to drop those in the Q&A or the chat section. We'll be sure to answer those for you. Very good questions, Wesley. So with that, why don't we go to the next slide? And just looking at our courses, this is the curriculum. They go in order, so it's sequential. And we do have the course descriptions on our website as well. So you're more than welcome to review those whenever you feel like visiting that website. But the first course that students are taking is Ongoing Conversion, Deepening Discipleship, and the Foundations of Spiritual Direction. The second course is Human Development for Spiritual Direction. The third course is Relating Skills for Spiritual Direction. And this is where your first residency falls. So that's about 10 months from when the class begins. And that happens during week 7 of the third course. And then the fourth course is Discernment and Spiritual Growth Theory and Practice. The fifth course is Advanced Spiritual Direction Skills and Practicum. And this is where the second residency will fall. That happens during week 2 of the fifth course. And that will serve as a as a launch into your practicum hours as well. And then the last course will be advanced prayer and situations.
It can be a little bit, these are the titles, so you can feel like maybe you don't get a sense of what they're about. But as Greg said, on the website, we've got a paragraph kind of describing what each of these courses are about and what you see in each course. And you should see kind of like an integration between the just knowledge of the human person and their development, with a real backbone of knowledge of the spiritual life and the development of the spiritual life, as well as learning the skills that are needed for spiritual direction.
Why don't we take a look at the residencies? Because this is a big part of it. For many people, they are excited about that experience where they get to meet with their cohorts face to face. For others, there might be a little bit of concern because they're concerned about, will I be able to put that time in? Is it sprung up on me? That sort of thing. And we're going to talk about that here. But the first thing I'm going to point out is just looking at these pictures from recent residencies that we've had on campus. And I mentioned earlier, as Maria did, that there really is a diversity of students that come into this cohort. So some of them are priests, some are deacons, some are consecrated lay people, some are religious sisters, some are secular lay. So, what we would typically find that are not secular, but not consecrated, but are active members of the church. Some are Catholic, some are Protestant. This is actually a real richness that we have in here, because when I speak to our students and I ask them, what is it like being in a class where, you have Father John Doe that's in the program as well, or maybe this married couple, and they share that this is actually something that has benefited them as they're preparing to become spiritual directors, because they now get to get a sense of what spiritual life is for each individual, regardless of where they are in their vocation, or if they're currently pursuing a specific vocation, or if they're still exploring it. So again, they get new ideas, new perspectives that will really help them out as they're active as spiritual directors. So that's one of the great benefits to them meeting in person for the residencies as well. But not even in person, even through the discussion boards, that sense of camaraderie and of community really does exist, even through the Canvas discussion boards. That's another benefit to this.
Definitely, Greg. And that's what they say. They start, that sense of being a cohort starts from their first class. In fact, some students, it's a hard decision. Sometimes a student needs to take a leave of absence and not do a course one term because of some situation or something that's come up, and they can do that. You're allowed to take at least 3 leaves of absence during the time that you're going through the course. But they're always like, oh no, that means my cohort's going to move on and I'm going to be with a different cohort. And so they really do form such a friendship. And the ones that have graduated now are they have support groups among them. They meet for supervision, peer supervision. They have a lot of different ways that they're supporting each other. So they keep this friendship going, this community.
Yeah. It's one of the best parts about this. A lot of people ask, is that sense of community there, even though it's online? And in short, the answer is absolutely yes. Mm-hmm. So with that, just going a little bit deeper into the residencies as well. So as we mentioned, there are 2 residencies that happen. One takes place during your 3rd course. The other takes place during the 5th course. So there's some space between each one. And they happen on campus. Our campus is located in Sterling, Virginia. So that's about 45 minutes outside of DC. And it's about a 5-minute drive from Dulles Airport. So for those of you that are in the program and might be flying in, we're right around the corner. In fact, I believe there's a shuttle that takes students from the airport to the campus. So again, you're not having to hop on the highway to get to Divine Mercy. It's a very short drive. And also, students are lodged when they're here. They're lodged at a Marriott hotel, which is just right next door. In fact, it's close enough that students will typically just walk from the hotel to the campus if they prefer to do that. So again, everything is in very close proximity. But really, the purpose of the residencies is to take all of the knowledge and the skills that you're learning and begin practicing it. You'll have mock spiritual direction sessions. You'll begin to piece these things together, and you'll be evaluated by spiritual directors and by therapists, so that you can really hone in deeper in the listening skills and the communication skills and the ability to speak on certain topics that would be expected within spiritual direction. Maria, is there anything that you would like to add to the residencies?
No, I think so. I think you've said it, Greg. Thanks.
Great, good. And again, if any questions are coming up through this, feel free to drop them in. We'll be sure to answer that. So, looking at the time frame, because I know this is also a big deciding factor for people. Can I commit time to this? Will this actually work with my schedule? So the first thing to mention is that this is a term-based program, and each term is 8 weeks, and students are taking one course at a time. So every course is 8 weeks to complete. And again, it's asynchronous, so you can log in at any point that works within your daily schedule, but you'll still have deadlines, you'll have assignments due. So, you'll keep that in mind. And so you are going at a certain pace along with the rest of your cohorts. Usually, and this is not set in stone, every student's different, but typically students are committing somewhere between 6 to 9 hours per week on average. This is just, again, more of a pattern that we've seen with students. So I always encourage individuals who are looking into this to look at your own schedule, see if, just to be on the conservative side, if 9 hours a week is something that you could lend to the program. Some courses might be a little bit more dense. Other courses might be more familiar to you. So depending on the course or depending on how you are with your learning style or whatever it may be, you might be able to zip through some information and really need to take more time to absorb the information. But again, I would look at about somewhere between 6 to 9 hours on average.
And Greg, and that's how we built the courses. We built that them to take between 6 to 9 hours. And we do ask the students to give us feedback as they go through the course. We have them do evaluations, and that's what we're seeing. There are people that spend more time, but there are people that are retired that would love to dive more into. There's always more diving that you can do. We give a lot of optional readings on the platform. So, but really, I think they should feel secure. I do say the caveat, though, the first course is always going to take you a little bit of time to get used to the platform. If you've never learned online, to get used to learning online. So you do have to be patient with yourself in the first course. You just have to. It's woven in there that we understand that you're going to need, a little bit more hand holding in the first course. But
that learning curve always exists in every program. I've never seen
exactly.
a program where there was no learning curve. So, yeah. And again, I mean, not only that, even though there is that learning curve, there's an extensive student support service here at the university. And I always tell students, if I've never seen this as a problem, but I'll just throw it out there anyway. If for whatever reason you're having difficulty getting in touch with the right department pertaining to your question or whatever it is, you'll have my number. I'm always happy to still help you out or redirect you to who you need to speak with, just so you can get that support that's needed. Again, I don't think I've ever had to do it. Our support services here are great, but at the very least, I'm always happy to lend a hand as well. So with that, so we looked at the sort of weekly time commitment and the time per course. There are breaks between each course as well, so that you expect some breathing room between all of the courses that you're taking. So once you complete an 8-week course, you go into a break that lasts for 9 to 10 weeks. It all depends on where it falls during the academic calendar. But you will have this downtime. This is a great period for people to step back and reflect on the content that they're learning. Many people might reserve this time for vacations that they'll schedule. The major holidays fall during these down periods as well. So Thanksgiving, Christmas, Holy Week, these happen during these breaks as well. But also this is a pay-as-you-go program. And so this downtime also gives students an opportunity to replenish their funds as they're going through this. So it actually makes it a little bit more friendly to their wallets, as it's again a pay-as-you-go type of program. And in total, between the amount of time it takes to complete each course and also the breaks, it would be completed in full within 2 years. So as long as you're not taking any breaks from the program, you'll have 2 years to complete the program. Let's see. I had a thought and it's just escaped me. It'll come back to me. Maria, any other thoughts before we continue? All right, let's move.
Thank you. I had put myself on mute so that you didn't hear my coughing.
Okay. Oh, you know what? Actually, I just remembered. This is sort of jumping back to the residencies, but still pertaining to time commitment. The residencies, again, they happen during the 3rd and 5th term. If for whatever reason you're approaching those residencies and you have an event that's taking place, whether it's a wedding or maybe an emergency comes up, you do have the option to take a leave of absence. Every student has 3 leave of absences that they can use. So I wouldn't want you to feel like the academic year just won't work for you, or you always have something going on. I wouldn't let that be a deterrent from pursuing this. If God is calling you to this sort of ministry and you're really enjoying this option of a program, we're flexible when it comes to taking that time off. You can always get reinstated back into the program when you're ready to jump back into where you left off. So with that, just looking at the full tuition. So, and I'll mention there are opportunities to bring the costs down, but just sort of looking at the baseline, the cost per course is $778, and then the cost per residency is $1,000. That $1,000 is going to cover your lodging, it's going to cover your materials, it's going to cover most of your meals. So the only thing that you, the student, would be responsible for would be your travel and 3 of your dinners. But everything else will be covered under that $1,000. Now, as far as the cost per course, there are opportunities to bring it down by 10%. So if you are active in ministry, if you are a member of a parish, we'll speak one-on-one, but these are just each one of these could lend to bringing the cost down a little bit more. So by 10%, we'd be looking at more like $700 per course rather than $778. And again, this is a pay-as-you-go. So it's a certificate program, so you wouldn't be using student loans. You're paying course by course. But that downtime, again, many students usually use that as a way for them to replenish their funds. Oh, and you know what, before I move forward, when it comes to invoicing, students are invoiced about a week before, maybe 2 weeks before class begins. And then from that point, when you're invoiced, you have 30 days to pay off the balance. So we'll make sure that you get that balance ahead of time, and then you still have a little bit of space to pay that balance off as you're going. Now, how to apply? This is actually a very simple process, and it's 3 steps. So the first step is to complete the short application form on our website. And this really is not a standard college application. It's very short. I think it's very possible to have it completed within 5 to 10 minutes. And so after that, the next step would be to have 3 recommendations sent over. And these would not be so much letters of recommendation, but rather we have Google forms that they're on our website, or I can provide them for you, but you would send them to 3 different individuals. So one would be from your spiritual director, one would be from your pastor or your superior, and then the third one would come from basically anyone that's known you well enough for a little bit of time now. So other than a relative, we wouldn't want to look at, we wouldn't want to see relatives' recommendation, but friends are certainly acceptable, colleagues, fellow parishioners, etc. And so once we have these 2 steps completed, the final step would be to take part in the group interview. And this is actually something that happens, I believe we're doing these every Monday, and it is usually about 3 or 4, actually it is 3 or 4 students that sit with a couple of faculty members. Maria is actually one of them that serves as a facilitator. They happen over Zoom, and it goes from, for Eastern time, 7 to 8 p.m. And so it's an hour long, and it's really a chance for each student to demonstrate their interpersonal skills, and for the facilitators to get to know you better and get to see you exchange in dialogue with the other applicants. So you're not competing with the other applicants in the group interview, but you're rather you're each there for the same purpose, to really share more about yourself and share your ability to speak on these topics. Maria, I'd love for you to, if possible, talk a little bit more about this, just so that they can have a sense of what to expect in the interviews.
Yeah, I was hearing you talk about it, and it's like, oh, that could sound kind of daunting, but it's really not. It's super enjoyable. I think everyone comes into it a little bit apprehensive, but they always leave smiling and thanking each other. It's really an opportunity to get to know other people that are applying to the program. And I think it's just edifying to meet other people that just really have a love for the Lord, that really want to serve other people. And so, yeah, it's just it's not a painful experience at all. It's beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, I will say, if you're one that really loves the idea of going into this ministry and being a spiritual director, and it's something that brings you joy, then even though I understand that nerves can happen before an interview, these almost show up as mock spiritual direction sessions in a sense, not explicitly, but a little bit. And so I think that's why when I've sat in with the group interview, there really was that sense of joy with the applicants when they were doing this, because they really got to speak on a topic that they were so passionate about. And so if that's you, and that's something that, speaking to each of you prospective students, that being a spiritual director is something that brings you joy, then I wouldn't want you to feel too nervous about the interviews. Really, this is an opportunity for you to dive deeper into this passion of yours and wanting to serve others through this ministry.
And one thing that you will experience in the program, and that you should experience as you're going through the application process, is that we really believe that, video conferencing, even though it can't take the place of in-person learning, and that's why we have the residencies, it can go a long way in connecting us with each other and helping us really to get to know each other and to start building those relationships. So we try to use it as much as possible. When we're doing groups in the course, and that's why we use it for the group interview. It is a way to connect. Doesn't take the place of the in-person, but it is a way to connect, and there can be some good connections that can happen and bring us along in the process. So that's why we do try to do that.
Yeah. And also I'll highlight that, again, going back to step one of the application. If you're interested in filling out an application, especially because we are still enrolling for the spring, we do have a code that can waive the $25 fee for you. And it's in that red box. So it's SDC REG FREE. If you put that code in, once you get to the end of the application form, it'll become a free application for you. So again, I encourage everybody here that if you're really leaning towards starting in January, I would begin the process as early as this week and get that form in. That will at least lock in a spot for the next cohort, and then we can worry about steps 2 and 3 after that.
Yeah, Greg, because the holiday's coming, and people, pretty soon we're going to be into Christmas week. So we really want to get this paperwork done so that you can celebrate your holidays and be ready to start in January.
Yeah. And again, I'm here if you have any questions about this. If you need that support, I'm happy to help out, and there are no bad questions. Always happy to do what I can to make the process more streamlined. So that brings us to the end. And this is my contact information. My name is here. My email, my telephone number. You're welcome to call, text, email me, whatever works for you. That code again is right here if you wanted to fill out that form, but make it a free one for yourself. That's there. So with that, this is a great time to open up the floor to each of you with any questions that you have. If you wanted to take a moment to put those questions together, feel free to do that. Maria, I do get questions periodically throughout just speaking with individuals, and just one question that comes to mind for me is what would make someone considered eligible to apply for the program? What would qualify them to move forward into moving forward and going into this program?
Great question, Greg. This information is on our website. So if you don't catch some of it now, please go there. So basically, we ask that someone has a history of frequent spiritual direction. So we really believe that to be a spiritual director, or even to be considering this ministry, you have to have been in direction. And to be a spiritual director, you continue to need to be in direction. We have to always be discipled. So that is a very strong, Greg will definitely tell you if you don't have that, we'll just recommend you to find a spiritual director and get in spiritual direction and come back a little bit later when you've matured that relationship. We really want you to have a history of, periodic, frequent spiritual direction and have been in a spiritual direction relationship. Other things, Greg, the program itself does offer a person that, there are some students that come in that feel like, well, I kind of think this is what the Lord's saying to me, but I'm not sure, they've done their due diligence and maybe talked about to their spiritual director about it and some discernment, but they really need to start getting their feet wet in order to know. So they come into the program, they start doing that. And so the program does allow that. Pretty much the first 3 courses really are just giving you information, experience, helping you grow in your own self-knowledge so that you can just come up with a greater sense of if this is what the Lord is calling you to do. So you definitely you don't have to feel that you've got to have everything discerned and understood before you come into the program. We'll definitely walk you through those steps. As we mentioned before, it's really a calling, a ministry. Priests can be called to it. There is a school of thinking that every priest is a spiritual director, but the church really has been starting to understand and to say, in different that you definitely need training to be a spiritual director. And many priests, the reality is that many priests, even though they are priests, will tell you, yeah, I'm a priest, but I'm not trained to be a spiritual director. I don't feel comfortable giving spiritual direction, so I don't do that. They'll give advice and confession and things like that, and spiritual advice and pastoral counseling, but there are definitely priests that either don't have the time or don't feel comfortable um, giving spiritual direction. So, lay people, a lot of sisters and brothers or missionaries are also trained in spiritual direction. So there's just a lot of different people. And as you could see by the residency pictures, men, women, we do ask that we don't have like an age, you need to be a certain age to get into the program, but we definitely feel like there has to be a certain life experience. Sometimes that corresponds to numerical age, sometimes it doesn't. But we do feel like you need to a certain amount of life experience to have traveled the road of life to be able to accompany other people on it. I don't know, Greg, if there's anything else there.
I think you hit the nail on the head. That's, again, people that are called to this, if you've been hearing God direct, sharing with you that you should be assisting people within spiritual direction, that's a good reason to reach out to us if you're interested in moving forward. Having that experience with a spiritual director, not only because it's edifying for your own spiritual life, but because you also get to see and experience what it's like to be on the other side. Everything else that Maria shared related to that. And a lot of people are called to this. It's not just one type of individual, and not every priest has been trained in being a spiritual director. And that's why we have so many that go into this, because it's not something that was covered in seminary. So again, that's another reason why we have people of all sorts of different vocations and places where they are in life going into this.
Mm-hmm. So, Greg, there is a question here from Wesley. I'll read it. Is there an association of spiritual directors that provides accountability for spiritual directors? What are the liability issues for spiritual directors? Should spiritual directors take out liability insurance? Well, Wesley, you're definitely getting a sense of what this world looks like. There at this point in time in the United States, there is not an association that provides accountability for spiritual directors. As far as a Catholic association, there is a Episcopalian association. And something that I would love to help bring about because I think it's needed for all these spiritual directors that are being formed. There are definitely liability issues around spiritual direction. We teach the students about this and how to have some ethical best practices that you can use in spiritual direction, and how to set up the spiritual direction relationship so there's clarity about what the relationship is and an agreement about what the services are being offered. We do actually have our students take out liability insurance when they start practicum, because we want them to have that experience of going through the process of taking out liability insurance. And also we just feel like it's a best practice for them to have that liability insurance as they're going out to be spiritual directors in training. And it's really up to them later on if they want to take that out or not. Sometimes if they're religious, working inside a religious community, or working with a religious community, or working within a parish, sometimes those same faith communities already have a liability insurance that covers them. So, but it's definitely something, these are definitely very valid and things to be considered and thought of. And I think that the world of spiritual directors, some of our students have just made this comment sometimes, how they feel that, kind of like that the Lord is just calling people forward to this ministry. And because it's going to help so many people. But we do need to see how to support these people as they go out. And so there are different efforts going in that direction. I did want to say, Greg, that, when you do apply to the program, you do go through discernment as you're going through the program. I mean, we give you some steps that you can see with your own spiritual director, but it is important that, you kind of mature your discernment with your spiritual director. Even talking to them about your decision to want to apply to the program, and, because it's something prayerful, and you want to be taking them along. and having them walk alongside with you.
Yeah, yeah, that's exactly right. Wesley, great question too. I'm glad that you asked that. And gosh, I had a thought, it escaped me again. But yeah, I mean, as Maria mentioned, as far as just training students regarding liability issues and also that liability insurance that's in place for students, so they can prepare for it, and also just for the prudential purposes that it's there. Also, and Wesley really pointed out a question that I get asked frequently, which is, can a student use this education anywhere? And that actually comes into the question of, for instance, a lot of people think they have to apply to become a spiritual director, being certified, same way that a counselor needs to apply for licensure to do that. And really, there is no, at least within the Catholic Church. I think that Maria mentioned that the Episcopal Church has something in place, but within the Catholic Church, there's no sort of certification that one has to apply for or through in order to do this. What students are earning is a certificate of completion, showing that they've earned this is a credential, they've earned the education, they have the skills and knowledge so that they can go through into this ministry. So
Exactly, Greg. But we really since we're not your local faith community and we're not where you're going to be practicing your ministry, we really leave it up to those faith leaders in your local community to send you, to support you, for us to kind of, to send you and commission you. What we do is train you. And we do try to do it dotting all the I's and crossing all the T's, so that you really feel ready for this ministry. But we really leave it up for those faith communities that you're going to serve, for them to commission you and send you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I used to enroll for counseling at a different university, and I would always tell the students, they would ask me, can I use this degree anywhere? And I would always tell them that they're being trained to become counselors, they're getting everything that's required for that, to gain that knowledge, but we would always defer them to the state board as far as if they're considered eligible. And again, there is no officially, there's no certification that one has to apply for, but when it comes to practicing in your diocese or at your parish, you would go to that authority just to share that information, share that credential that you've earned, and then leaving it up to them as far as what your next step would be.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, Greg, it looks like we're over time here.
Yeah. But I appreciate everybody being here. I love the questions that were asked. And again, if any other questions come up, my contact information's here. I would love to have a one-on-one with you. Again, we still have a start date coming up for January 11th. It's not too late. It's around the corner, but there is still time. So again, I'd love to speak with you one-on-one. So with that said, thank you all for being here. Maria, thank you for joining me this evening.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. God bless
All right.
everyone.
Take care.
Bye.